When starting a major capital project, it's very important that you have a clear vision of what the goal is on your project. And in all cases, the goal is to meet your in-service date with successful commissioning and startup. This means you must have a very clear vision of what success looks like during commissioning right from the beginning of your project. And it's like this for everything, that you set a clear goal, and projects are no different. You wouldn't start running a marathon without first knowing where the finish line is. You'd be running in circles for a long time if you didn't know how to finish the race. So the same thing applies to projects, is you must have a clear understanding of what success looks like during commissioning and startup right from the beginning of your project if you want to be able to finish your projects as efficiently as possible to meet your project in service date. This was a presentation I gave explaining why projects must start with commissioning. Have a listen so you can understand how to start projects with the end in mind.
You're listening to the Industrial Commissioning Association podcast, where we discuss best practices for industrial plant process and energy system commissioning. Get ready to say no to outdated industry norms and say yes to improved project performance. Here's your host, Paul Turner.
In today's discussion, we're going to talk about why projects must start with commissioning with no additional time or money. You're about to see how to use commissioning as a strategic tool to save time and money on projects. My name is Paul, and I show organizations working on industrial plant process and energy systems how to become global commissioning leaders, capable of completing commissioning on time and on budget by applying the ICA Global Commissioning Standard best practices to projects. The first thing I want to mention is that commissioning is not a well understood discipline on projects. If you're not familiar with commissioning, or you've heard some confusing things about commissioning, maybe your past projects have not gone well during commissioning, it's certainly not your fault. There's a limited amount of information on commissioning that's out there, and commissioning is not well understood on projects. The bits and pieces of information that you can find are confusing and often contradicting, and maybe don't even apply to your projects. It's difficult to find the right guidance, and this keeps organizations from achieving the success they would like to have with projects. So it's understandable if you've had these past experiences on projects. You just need the right person to explain commissioning to you and provide the right standards to follow to make commissioning much more efficient for you and your organization. A lot of people want you to believe that commissioning only takes place at the end of projects, and I'm here to tell you that they're wrong. They have their own reasons for wanting you to think that, but it's absolutely not true. If you've ever thought that projects are just always late and over budget, and that's just the way it is, this is a common misconception in the industry. In fact, there are several groups working on projects that benefit when projects are late and over budget, because who do you think those project overruns are getting paid to? Some groups on projects are not that interested in commissioning, and it's not in their best interest to have someone looking over their shoulder telling them what's wrong with their work. The difference with the Industrial Commissioning Association is we actually want you and your projects to be successful. We want you to meet cost, schedule, and quality objectives on your projects. We want to help you become a global commissioning leader that can successfully complete projects, and we've compiled all the resources you need to be successful with commissioning. So that's what we're here for, to show you how to consistently deliver successful projects, and I'm going to show you how to make that happen during this presentation. My goal for this presentation is to help two types of organizations. For organizations that are new to commissioning, you'll see how the Industrial Commissioning Association gives you the commissioning best practices you need to implement world-class commissioning processes and lead projects to success. For organizations that already have processes but need more mature commissioning methods within their existing project delivery strategies, you'll see how to become part of the elite 1% of commissioning professionals to achieve peak performance with commissioning and deliver world-class projects with sophisticated commissioning processes to save time and money. My goal during this presentation is to get you to believe that following the ICA Global Commissioning Standard on projects is the key to successfully completing commissioning. And I'm going to show you the planning frameworks that make it simple for you to plan and execute commissioning on your projects. to complete projects as efficiently as possible. Whether you work on big projects or small projects, the ICA Global Commissioning Standard applies to all sizes of projects, and I'm going to show you how. In the past 25 years, I've had the amazing chance to build satellites and rockets for the Canadian Space Agency. This taught me the importance of high quality standards when completing projects. I then had the opportunity to work in the power industry, working on HVDC transmission projects and hydroelectric generation projects. I've also worked on large wastewater treatment projects, upgrading and expanding the facilities to meet higher environmental license requirements. And more recently, I've been able to help other people apply commissioning best practices to their projects through the training and certification programs that we offer. But I didn't always understand the commissioning process. In fact, just a few years ago, I was just starting my commissioning journey. I was starting out as the commissioning manager on a $5 billion mega project here in central Canada. And when you're working on a project this big, it's basically four mega projects rolled into one super mega project. The project consisted of a 230 kV AC switchyard in the south, a 230 kV AC switchyard in the north, two HVDC converter stations at either end of the DC line, and four 230 kV synchronous condensers at the southern station. Each of these projects were basically four separate $1 billion projects, and each of these is a large project just on its own. I was the commissioning manager responsible to oversee all of these projects, and I needed to integrate each part into one single HVDC link spanning 1,400 kilometers and transferring 2,300 megawatts. This seemed pretty daunting when I was just getting started. How was I possibly going to manage all these pieces of the project and make them all come together as one system during commissioning? I needed to work with each of the four EPC contractors to ensure this entire system was ready to be integrated with the bulk electric system. And I wanted to prove to myself that I could manage commissioning for such a complex project that spanned over 1,400 kilometers. My team was depending on me to pull this all together. Typically, the old way of commissioning would be to just test all these systems at the end and hope for the best that everything worked. But we knew this would never work for this size of project. When 9 out of 10 projects are late and over budget, we could not allow that to happen on this project. It was clear that there was just too much time and money on the line, and we could not allow this project to be months late and millions of dollars over budget, just like most projects are. We needed a more methodical approach to commissioning to make sure this complex system worked reliably in the end. We needed to follow a structured method to systematically complete each portion of the project and bring each system online to the bulk electric system in an organized manner. So everything is done safely and there is no delays in the project. Any delays to the project would be very expensive, and we needed to make sure we avoided any delays like this. After all, the system is supplying power that people are depending on in the end, and we needed to make sure that these new assets could be depended on for decades of reliable operation. When working on plant process or energy system projects, there are always a lot of people involved. There's design groups, procurement groups, construction groups, vendors, consultants, regulators, and lots more groups involved. And everyone has their own idea of what success looks like during commissioning. It is challenging to keep everyone aligned to the common goal of commissioning and to make sure that people don't go off in their own direction that does not align with successful commissioning and startup. It's pretty easy for groups to get off track when everyone starts working in different directions. And when this happens, projects turn into a big mess at the end. It takes a lot of effort to keep all groups aligned and focused on the end goal of commissioning, and a cohesive commissioning plan is required to do this. Otherwise, it can take a lot of time and a lot of money to put back together in the end of the project. I got to see each of the four EPC contractors' approach to commissioning, what worked well and what didn't work well, and there were some stark contrasts in each contractor's approach to commissioning. One of the EPC contractors chose a cowboy approach to commissioning. They had no test plans, they had limited documentation, and any documentation that they did have really was incomplete and not that good. And they did not follow a structured approach to commissioning. I could see this approach was not working, and in fact, they missed testing of a very critical failure mode of a very important oil pump. And during a power outage, they ended up wiping one of the bearings on this large rotating machine. This completely destroyed the machine, requiring them to disassemble a unit, send parts back overseas to factories for repair, and this took months and cost them millions of dollars to fix from this one mistake. Another one of the EPC contractors had world-class commissioning processes. Their test plans and procedures were thorough and complete in advance of testing. Their test sequence were immaculate, and we had tests scheduled out 18 months in advance, and testing started exactly on this day that was planned, even a year and a half in advance of that date. After seeing both of these polar opposite approaches to commissioning happen concurrently, it was clear to me that a structured approach to commissioning saves time and money on projects. Because with the structured approach, after 2 years of meticulous planning and coordination for commissioning, we were able to meet the project in service date within 4 days of what was originally planned. And this never happens on projects. This was super impressive. However, with the other EPC's cowboy approach to commissioning, they were just gambling and they ended up losing big in the end. Their portion of the project ended up 2 years late and millions of dollars over budget, and they lost a lot of money on their contract. In fact, their lead project manager got fired in the last few months of the project, and it was clear to me why is because he didn't know how to finish the project during commissioning. Everything came apart in the end, and he was not able to contain the mess. It was clear to me what a successful approach to commissioning looks like, and I was determined to make sure that all the projects I worked on followed these same best practices for commissioning, and I want to make sure that your projects follow these same best practices as well, which is why the Industrial Commissioning Association has developed the set of ICA Global Commissioning Standards so project teams can implement a structured approach to commissioning to avoid cowboy commissioning and save time and money on projects. I mentioned earlier that 9 out of 10 projects are late and over budget. This is a statistic from Professor Bent Flivberg. He's a professor at the University of Oxford, and he has compiled a database of over 16,000 projects and the outcomes of each. And from his research, his database shows that 92.5% of projects are late and over budget, and that the complexity of projects is a contributing factor to how late projects are. That's 9 out of 10 projects that are late and over budget, and shows that a structured approach to commissioning is required to protect projects from going so far over budget. When the best practices outlined in the ICA Global Commissioning Standard are followed, this significantly reduces project delays and project cost overruns that 9 out of 10 projects experience. By seeing the direct application of the best practices outlined in the ICA Global Commissioning Standard applied to projects, I was able to see how projects are successfully delivered during commissioning. By following the ICA Global Commissioning Standard best practices, this gives me confidence that I am able to successfully complete all sizes of projects on time and on budget, no matter how big or how small or how complex they are. Developing and implementing the ICA Global Commissioning Standard has given me and my team the confidence to know how projects will end, whether they'll be months late and millions of dollars over budget, or if they will be completed efficiently to meet cost and schedule objectives. So here's what we're going to cover in the next half hour or so. We're going to cover the 3 secrets to commissioning success. Secret number 1, how to scale the ICA Global Commissioning Standard to all sizes and types of projects. Secret number 2 is how to start with the end in mind on projects. And secret number 3 is how to use commissioning as a strategic tool to save time and money on projects. So let's go over the first secret to commissioning success, which is how to scale the ICA Global Commissioning Standard to all sizes and types of projects. The projects I referenced earlier were multi-billion-dollar projects, and you might be thinking, the projects we work on are much smaller. This standard sounds like too much for smaller projects. The essence of the ICA Global Commissioning Standard is to start with the end in mind, regardless of the size of your project. It's exactly like Stephen Covey says in his book, 7 Habits of Highly Successful People. His habit number 2 is begin with the end in mind. No matter if projects are big or small, each project must start with the end in mind, which means having a clear vision of what success looks like during commissioning right from the start. It's like that for everything. Projects are no different. You wouldn't run a marathon without first knowing where the finish line is. You would be running around in circles for a long time if you didn't first know how to finish the race. It's the same for all sizes of projects. You need a methodical process to complete projects to meet your in-service date. This is the framework outlined in the ICA Global Commissioning Standard on projects, and it represents what must take place during each stage of projects in order to start with the end in mind. The standard defines what must take place during FEED and procurement processes for commissioning, including what is required in construction contracts to define how projects will be completed during commissioning, what commissioning and operations input is required during design reviews to capture lessons learned to align with the end of projects, and preliminary systematization so that all activities align with the startup sequence to meet your project in-service date. The standard defines what must take place during early construction processes, including detailed definition of your mechanical completion packages, detailed definition of your integrated construction and commissioning schedule, and off-site testing for FAT and integrated factory acceptance testing to ensure manufacturers' testing in the factory aligns with what you intend to do for your on-site testing. The standard defines what must take place for construction completions and on-site testing processes, including the methodical process to complete construction by systems, the on-site testing that must take place during pre-commissioning, commissioning, and startup, and testing during performance verification and trial operation to optimize operations. And finally, this standard defines what must take place during the final stages of the project, including how systems are placed in service and handed over to operations, the operational requirements to prepare operating teams for ongoing operation and maintenance of the new facilities, and the final tasks for commissioning closeout. A mistake a lot of organizations make is they only focus on the on-site testing tasks. And that's just the tip of the iceberg, though. On-site testing is only 20% of the commissioning process. The testing is the part that gets all the attention because people can physically touch and feel and see the testing activities taking place. So this is understandable, but project teams that only focus on on-site testing are missing 80% of the activities required to make commissioning successful. These 80% of activities, the steps of the commissioning process that are hidden below the surface, these are what makes your on-site testing activities successful. And if you're only focusing on the tip of the iceberg and focusing only on testing, then you're unlikely to be successful completing projects. This approach is what leads to 9 out of 10 projects being late and over budget. Let me tell you about a much smaller project I worked on that did not start with the end in mind and did not follow a methodical approach to completing commissioning. The project was a wastewater treatment plant. It was less than 5% of the project budget than the projects I mentioned earlier, so a much smaller project in the $100 to $200 million range, which is still a lot of money, but much less than a multi-billion dollar project that I talked about earlier. I was brought into the project when construction was about 60% complete, and the owner was in a panic. They needed me on site right away. And I remember I had to cancel a trip to Italy because it was urgent that commissioning start right away. So when I got to site, my first mission was to quickly prepare a plan for commissioning. I joined the project in September, and low flow seasonal testing was to start 2 months later in November. I did not have much time to prepare, but I knew I had a framework to follow from the previous projects I had worked on. So I rapidly started to plan for commissioning, but I quickly found a fundamental flaw in the project. And it really wasn't necessary for me to cancel my trip to Italy and rush to site because there would be no commissioning happening anytime soon. The damage was already done much earlier in the project, and there wasn't much I could do. There was no commissioning involvement during FEED and procurement, and this is where the problem started. What had happened was the pre-qualification process was insufficient and allowed an unqualified group to bid on the work. And this wasn't anyone's fault. They were doing their best. They just didn't have the necessary skill sets to identify what was required for commissioning to select the right group during procurement. The proponents bidding on the work, of course, said they were commissioning experts, but That's rarely true when it comes from the sales executives preparing proposals. A much deeper dive was required to truly evaluate each group's ability to plan and execute commissioning. And without early commissioning involvement, the project ended up awarding the work to an unqualified group that was incapable of performing their pre-commissioning and vendor startup responsibilities. They had no internal quality management processes and were not able to deliver what was required for commissioning. It was a mess, and I wished I was on the Tuscan seaside instead, drinking wine in Italy. Because the project ignored commissioning and left it to the end, the project ended up being 3 years late and many million dollars over budget, far more than the amount the procurement group thought they were saving by awarding the work to the lowest bidder. Despite my efforts to implement a structured commissioning process, the contractor did not have the internal management processes or the required skill sets needed for construction quality management or for their pre-commissioning responsibilities. And it was a very long, drawn-out process that resulted in significant cost overruns to finish the project. A much better approach would have been to start with the ICA Global Commissioning Standard, to start with the end in mind, and plan for project success right from the beginning. This was another big aha moment for me, that commissioning is not only for big projects, a methodical approach to commissioning is required for all sizes of projects because there are lots of pieces to the commissioning puzzle, and an upfront commissioning effort is required to make sure all the pieces fit together at the end, regardless of the size of projects. Without a methodical approach to complete commissioning, completing projects always results in a cowboy commissioning. It's the Wild West. You never have a consistent method to complete projects, and you end up having to reinvent the wheel every time. And this is hardly a responsible approach to completing projects when there is so much time and money on the line. A consistent approach is required to start projects with the end in mind. A question I get asked a lot is, what types of projects require commissioning? And there's really two types of commissioning. There's the building commissioning process. This is ASHRAE or NEBB or BCXA, CSA. These are all building commissioning processes. And then there's the industrial commissioning process, which is defined by the ICA Global Commissioning Standard. Building commissioning is very common. When you walk down a city block, you pass a lot of buildings that require HVAC and life safety system commissioning. But industrial commissioning is a bit more specialized since it's a much more integrated process of more complex systems and requires much more attention to the operational aspects of the facility. The facilities requiring industrial commissioning are a bit more hidden since when you walk down a city block, you don't see as many substations or an LNG plant or a water treatment facility. This is why building commissioning has gotten a lot more attention over the years and is maybe why these two commissioning processes often get confused. So there are a lot of similarities between these two processes, but there's a reason that process and energy systems don't use ASHRAE as the standard for commissioning. The building commissioning process doesn't cover all the aspects required for industrial facilities. Building commissioning systems are typically much more standalone systems. Sure, there's some small interfaces, but for the most part, the lighting control system is independent from the security system, is independent from the HVAC, and independent from the sprinkler system. These life safety systems largely function on their own and don't integrate as one functional plant process, which is why the ICA Global Commissioning Standard was developed to cover all aspects of more complex commissioning of integrated systems. The industrial commissioning process applies to projects such as power systems, including a high voltage substation, power generation, power transmission, or renewable energy systems, oil and gas systems such as an LNG plant, process systems such as water and wastewater treatment, desalination plant, hydrogen generation facilities, manufacturing facilities such as mining and chemical production, data center power and cooling systems. Data center power and cooling systems often get a little bit more complex. Rail and transport systems with switching and controls requiring integration. Any project that has mechanical, electrical, and automation systems that need to function together as one integrated functional system. So that's the distinction between these two commissioning processes and the types of projects that the industrial commissioning process applies to. Now let's go over the second secret to commissioning success, which is how to get your project teams to start with the end in mind and how to incorporate this into your existing project delivery strategies. When organizations are looking to improve their project delivery strategies for commissioning, they sometimes feel overwhelmed on how to get their team from point A to point B more efficiently. But let me assure you, 9 out of 10 projects are not meeting expectations on their projects. Commissioning is complex, and it's quite common that most project teams are not addressing risks correctly. Your projects are just like a lot of others with delays and cost overruns that you would rather avoid. The project teams that can get from point A to point B more efficiently are the project teams that start with the end in mind and take a proactive approach to commissioning. So everyone has a very clear understanding of what success looks like during commissioning right at the beginning of projects. It's like that for everything, and projects are no different. In order to achieve your project in service date, you need to know what that looks like, and that's always smooth commissioning and startup to meet your project dates. If you don't know what B looks like when you're starting at A, then it's unlikely that you'll get there smoothly. Starting projects with the end in mind requires a different approach to projects. The project management approach of construction-led projects is really a broken concept that leads to 9 out of 10 projects being late and over budget. While this approach may have worked 30 years ago, projects are just far too complex for this to work anymore. Lots of organizations are stuck with this old model and they don't know how to break free with a more modern approach to projects. Organizations that take a commissioning led approach to projects are the ones that succeed. Projects that start with the end in mind are the 10% of projects that succeed in meeting cost and schedule objectives. When you're implementing more sophisticated project delivery strategies for commissioning, it's not about a wholesale change to how you deliver projects. You, of course, want to keep the parts that are already working. Increasing the maturity of your commissioning processes is more about layering a more sophisticated approach to completing projects on top of your already existing project delivery processes. By growing your team's capabilities, implementing a standardized approach for consistency across projects, and by implementing tools to streamline your project completions. A sophisticated approach to commissioning is more about being a conductor through all stages of projects rather than a soloist at the end during testing. Commissioning's role is to make sure that all instruments through all stages of the project are playing in harmony. And that's where the real value comes in when your commissioning conductor joins the project right from the start. Commissioning is about guiding the design, procurement, and construction processes so that all the moving parts come together seamlessly during on-site testing. You're certainly not going to hire your entire commissioning team of, say, 50 people at the beginning of your project, but you'll at least want your conductor involved earlier to start working with earlier groups to make sure everyone keeps their eye on the prize for a seamless startup at the end. Without a clear vision of what success looks like during commissioning right from the start of projects, the focus naturally defaults to a construction-led goal with completing installations being everyone's main priority. But this isn't going to get you a functional plant. Instead, what you'll be left with is several pieces of equipment bolted to the floor with nothing working correctly together as a system. When you've got commissioning involved earlier and they understand the bigger picture of the commissioning process, they are the conductor to help your project manager lead all project groups through a well-structured commissioning process. And the Industrial Commissioning Association is here to help you improve the maturity of your project delivery strategies. Now let's go over the third secret to commissioning success, which is how to use commissioning as a strategic tool to save time and money on projects. A common misconception that a lot of organizations have is that they view commissioning as an expense and miss the opportunity to use commissioning as a strategic tool. But when projects start with the end in mind and start with commissioning, projects are able to complete much more efficiently. This is very common on projects, so don't worry if you've thought this in the past. You're not alone. A lot of organizations are stuck with this old misconception of what commissioning is. Many organizations believe that commissioning is just testing at the end of projects, or worse, that completing construction is the end of projects. or they try to assign commissioning to the construction contractor, thinking that this is easier with one less contract to manage. And they miss out on the commercial and project management aspects of commissioning that should have taken place much earlier in projects. They miss the 80% of the commissioning activities, the part of the iceberg below the surface. These are the critical tasks before on-site testing even starts that get missed or forgotten about, which impacts the efficiency of on-site technical testing later in projects. These are all the common narratives in the industry, and I hear this from a lot of people working on projects. It's a problem across all projects and across many of the industries. While we were working on the Bipole 3 power project in central Canada, the multi-billion-dollar power project I was telling you about earlier, there was a similar power project taking place at the same time on the east coast of Canada called Muskrat Falls. Both of these projects were multi-billion-dollar HVDC transmission projects, and it was interesting because these were very similar projects that were happening at the same time, and we could compare the different approaches that management was taking for commissioning. Now, I wasn't involved in the Muskrat Falls project, but the project did not turn out well and actually resulted in a public inquiry titled Muskrat Falls, a Misguided Project. You can read this report. It's available online at muskratfallsinquiry.ca, and the report makes it pretty easy to see what took place during the project. On Bipole 3, management had a very proactive approach to commissioning, and I commend them for that. I was involved in the project as the commissioning manager right from the start. That allowed me to participate in design processes, offsite testing in the factory, and construction processes on site. I was able to work with all the EPC contractors, all the PhD experts, and operational teams to plan for successful commissioning and startup at the end of the project. One thing I want to highlight is the contrasting approach to offsite testing between these two projects. On an HVDC project, the control and protection systems are quite complex to manage 2,300 megawatt transfers between converter stations that are 1,400 kilometers apart from each other. Our team of HVDC experts recognized this very early and planned for 6 months of integrated factory acceptance testing to perform functional and dynamic testing on the 60 control and protection cubicles in the factory before they were split, and 30 cubicles were shipped to the north and 30 cubicles were shipped to the south. There was, of course, lots of pressure to release these cubicles from the factory because they were urgently needed at site for installation, but we knew that these cubicles must work before leaving the factory if on-site testing was to go smoothly. And sure enough, with this approach, on-site testing was a breeze. The only thing we really had to find was a few small wiring errors that were easily fixed. But this early approach to testing both the hardware and the software in the factory saved a lot of time during on-site testing because we knew everything worked before it arrived at site. Now, contrast that to the approach management took for the Muskrat Falls control and protection cubicles. The project ended up years late and millions or even billions of dollars over budget. I don't know what the final number ever was. These were the headlines that were published at the time. In March 2022, software struggles persist, completion impossible to predict. Not a good headline. In June 2022, software troubles blamed for $260 million cost increase. That is incredible. In March 2023, Muskrat Falls discovers new problems, and the article then goes in to describe the problems during testing of the software at full power capacities. Now, you can see by these headlines, they're still developing software for control and protection at a very late stage in the project. These software problems can only exist if the cubicles left the factory without being fully factory acceptance tested, and I don't know how much time and money the project thought they were saving by rushing the cubicles to site to be installed, but I'm sure it was less than the resulting years of delays and millions of dollars in over expenditures. So I can't comment too much more on Muskrat Falls because I wasn't there, but from the public inquiry and from these public headlines, you can see the two different approaches that management took for commissioning and the resulting public scrutiny that Muskrat Falls had to endure by deferring commissioning to later in the project. Nobody working on projects wants a public inquiry document titled A Misguided Project. Nobody wants to deal with this type of public scrutiny. Nobody wants projects to be years late like this, and nobody wants to pay for millions or billions of over expenditures on projects as they're late. At the Industrial Commissioning Association, we have case studies of several projects that avoided commissioning and left it to the end of projects and could have avoided these costly mistakes with a more proactive approach to commissioning. We don't want your organization to have to learn these expensive lessons learned the hard way. By sharing these lessons learned, we're able to help organizations avoid the costly mistakes that others have already made on projects in the past. These lessons learned make clear that the cost of fixing things at the end is far higher than if organizations had invested in commissioning from the start, and that a proactive approach to commissioning is your best insurance to identify issues earlier and avoid costly mistakes later. Because commissioning is not just about the technical details, it's about the financial and time cost of rework, delays, and the risk of project failure. It's about connecting the dots between commissioning and the impact on projects' cost, schedule, and quality performance. So we've covered a lot of good information in this presentation, but what's next? How do you actually incorporate the ICA Global Commissioning Standard into your project delivery strategies to improve project outcomes? If you had a more proactive approach to risks on projects to identify potential issues earlier and implement solutions earlier when it's easier and cheaper to address them, do you think that would save time and money on projects? If you had a standard commissioning process to follow on projects so you don't have to reinvent the wheel each time with the same approach to commissioning across all of your projects, do you think this would result in efficiencies and cost savings within your organization? If you approach commissioning as a strategic tool to reduce risk on projects rather than just testing at the end, do you think this would save projects time and money? Do you think you would have a better chance of being successful with projects when you start projects with the end in mind and focus on the end goal of delivering high quality assets that can be used for decades of reliable operation rather than the current construction-led approach that focuses only on installation? It's difficult for me to cover all the aspects of commissioning in a short presentation like this, and sometimes it can feel like drinking from a fire hose when you're trying to understand commissioning, which is why the Industrial Commissioning Association offers support to organizations to increase maturity of organizations' commissioning best practices so they can deliver world-class projects on time and on budget. The Industrial Commissioning Association offers a progression path to take organizations to the level of maturity they desire. If organizations are still stuck with cowboy commissioning, we've got programs to take you to the next intermediate level. If organizations are still stuck with construction-led projects, we've got programs to take them to the next advanced level to fully take advantage of the time and money savings that commissioning-led projects can offer. Some organizations like to also get their individuals CXPM certified to showcase to clients and stakeholders that they are part of the elite 1% of commissioning managers that can reliably and consistently complete projects on time and on budget. Stakeholders like it when you can demonstrate the high quality of the people you can provide on projects. We've got a program that could advance organizations quickly along their commissioning journey to achieve project excellence. If your company has less mature commissioning processes, we've got support and resources to help you integrate world-class commissioning into your project delivery strategies. It can take a long time for organizations to make this transition on their own. It took me 10 years to become proficient with commissioning, and with our support and resources, you can make the transition a lot quicker. You can get everything you need all at once to make a step change improvement in your project delivery strategies and achieve success on projects in as short a time as possible. It's a choice you make right at the beginning of projects. You can choose if you're going to take commissioning seriously and your intention is to delight your project stakeholders at the end of the project, or you can choose to ignore commissioning and defer it to the end of the project as only testing, with unhappy project stakeholders pointing out all the mistakes that you made during the project. The Industrial Commissioning Association is here to help, to make the transition to more sophisticated commissioning strategies much easier so you can efficiently complete projects on time and on budget. Contact us at info@icxa.net to learn more and book a call to discuss further. I look forward to speaking with you.
Thanks for listening. To become a member of the Industrial Commissioning Association, visit icxa.net. Members get access to commissioning standards, procurement specifications, commissioning training and certification, plus many more specialized resources to help you with commissioning of your industrial plant process and energy systems. Visit icxa.net for more information.